All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. Don't forget, I sometimes forget to tell you, don't forget to click subscribe. It's in the bottom right, just the square that says Halitics in white on a blue field. That will get you a subscription to Halitics. It don't cost nothing. I think you get your money's worth for sure. Arlen is with me as he is on Mondays. Pretty much every Monday is a Monday with Arlen. Hey, Arlen, how you doing?
Doing just fine. By the way, have you passed the 200 mark on subscribers? I know you were close to it before. I'm still struggling to get there, Arlen. I'm kind of disappointed. The numbers, they did start to creep back a little bit. I had some good programs last week, at least in terms of response and viewership. But getting those numbers up has been even more challenging. I knew it would be hard, but I have to say it's even more challenging than I thought it would be. Well, like I said, Hal, before as we were talking off the air, there's just so much competition. There are so many people doing podcasts and spouting off about, politics and everything else. It's hard to break into, the market.
Well, you're absolutely right. That's a great point. I agree with you. I also would note a few other points on that score. I haven't been doing it for that long. I feel like it's been a long time, and I certainly have broadcast, in past iterations of my life, but doing this particular stream, Halitics, has been several months. It's been more than half a year, actually, but in the realm that's not that long. Many others have been doing it for years, even decades now. So there is that issue. The longer you do it, presumably, the more people can find you. So there's that. And I think also just my style is a little bit challenging for a lot of people. As you know, I don't really follow any standard ideological view. Even those who are really anti-establishment, I'm not exactly like them, and I'll show that later in the program if we get a chance on a clip through a clip with Greta Thunberg, the climate activist. I think sometimes I'm a little too willing for some, not for you perhaps, but for some to see that even the establishment isn't always wrong. And I think that is because there's some people who are just reflexively anti-expert, anti-establishment, anti-intellectual, period. And that they are often now occupying kind of the same space I do, but I don't share their views on everything, like vaccines.
I think you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody who agrees with you on everything. But at least you're provocative and you say what you believe and it comes across. And
I hope, yes. Well, nobody agrees with everybody. Nobody agrees. We all have slightly unique views, right? I mean, I'm sure, I don't know. I mean, I've noticed my wife and I tend to agree on most things, but not everything. How about you and Nancy? Are you on the same page mostly or not really?
Oh yeah, we are. She's not as political as I am, but she definitely is on the same page, and as are many of our friends. I don't really know anybody that's on the opposite Trump side, but
see, I think that's a problem. I think that's an issue. We're too siloed. We need to be able to listen to other people, and even if we don't respect their view, ultimately listen to them with respect and some degree of empathy. And you can't do that if you never talk to somebody who has a different, who's really on the other side of the fence politically.
It's a tough assignment, Hal, because, sometimes you look at those people and think, are they stupid? Why don't they see what I see? But, you're right. Ultimately, we're going to have to get along with the other side if we're going to make any kind of progress politically in this country. We're just too divided.
All right. Well, I have on screen now somebody that I do admire. I am at this point probably actually going to vote for her, although I want to see how she does compared to Dr. Cornel West. This is Dr. Jill Stein running as a Green. Arlen, I'm sure you will not vote for her, although it is, I guess, possible because you live in such a dark blue state that you wouldn't fear that a vote for Stein would help Trump, A, and B, it might help the Green Party, and that might be something that you're inclined to do.
I have voted for Stein. I have voted for her in the past,
because of the reasons that you say, because, my vote doesn't really mean anything in California. We already know the result. And in fact, in most states, the votes don't really matter. There's just a number of swing states where it's important who wins, So, yeah, I have voted for her, and without hurting any Democrats.
All right, I'm going to play this clip now. This is her announcement. She's running because Cornel West dropped out of the Green Party primary system. They have kind of it's not really primaries the way I think of that, where you have votes in various states. Instead, they have a convention, but whatever you want to call it, he dropped out of that. So she's filling that vacuum. I'm glad she is, actually, and I'm considering seriously voting for her. Here's her announcement. We're going to parse it. We're also going to look at the response from pundits and your response as well, Arlen. But let's get to this video.
People are tired of being thrown under the bus by wealthy elites and their bought politicians.
I don't hear it.
Tired of living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to pay the rent.
Right, Arlen was not hearing that. Let me see if I can get the audio to him. I'm glad you chimed in because I think I see what the problem is. Yes, I don't have this one going to Zoom, so we're going to make sure you get it. And let's see if we can.
If other people are getting it, that's fine.
Well, they are, but I want you to hear it because they definitely are, Arlen. But I wanted to make sure you caught this as well because I want you to chime in. And if you don't hear it, I don't know how you can really fairly assess the statements, right? The persuasiveness of her pitch, as well as the topics that she addresses. So I think you'll hear this now. If you do hear it, just thumbs up or yes or whatever. Let's go.
Locked in student debt and medical debt, child poverty doubling, rising diseases of despair, growing hopelessness. The political system is broken. The two Wall Street parties are bought and paid for. Over 60% of us now say the bipartisan establishment's failed us, and we need a party that serves the people. I'm Jill Stein, and I'm running for president to offer that choice for the people outside of the failed two-party system. We'll put solutions to the crises we face: crushing inequality, endless war, and climate collapse. And we'll put these front and center in this election and on the ballot across the country. The ruling parties that got us into this mess aren't getting us out. Both parties are squandering trillions on the endless war machine, fueling conflict around the world, while tens of millions here at home lack food, housing, healthcare. Democrats have betrayed their promises for working people, youth, and the climate again and again, while Republicans don't even make such promises in the first place. And both parties are a danger to our democracy, expanding censorship, criminalizing protest, throwing competitors off the ballot, suppressing debates,
American people who've been systematically locked out of these debates,
rigging their primaries. So forget the pundits and the attack dogs who tell you to ignore your misery and just keep voting for those who caused it in the first place. Change won't come from the ruling elites. It comes from we, the people. And when we stand together, we can create living wage jobs for all Americans. We can guarantee an economic bill of rights with the right to a job, to health care, to housing, to food, education, and more. We can abolish student debt, medical debt. We can create a Green New Deal with millions of jobs to fight climate collapse and protect Mother Earth. And we can ensure our constitutional rights and freedoms and justice for all. We can end the endless wars and rampant militarism and use diplomacy and international law instead to end violence, occupation, and apartheid. We do have the power, and we can use it in this election to start building an America and a world that works for all of us. go to jillstein2024.com and join us.
All right, so there's that video, Arlen, and I'll just say right up front, it was long, but I played all of it, because I did find it to be very impressive. I'd like your reaction, and I'll give a little bit more detail on my thoughts, but you go first.
Well, there's nothing there that I can disagree with. She makes a lot of sense. Her issues are my issues. I wish she was president, but I know it's not going to happen in this country now. So, I just don't want her to hurt Joe Biden and help elect Donald Trump. That's my main worry. But as far as on the issues and everything she says, she's right.
Yeah, and one thing I found very good, let me say, you just use the word good, is she focused so much in that video on economics and on war. She did not talk a lot, unless I missed it, and I saw what I wanted to see and heard what I wanted to hear. There wasn't a lot of the identity politics, which to me really are divisive and pit poor, struggling, and working people against each other. So it was more about universal issues. She talked about healthcare. She talked about jobs. She talked about endless war. I think that, honestly, and we'll get in a moment, Arlen, to the issue of how this may or may not hurt Democrats, and whether people should even care whether it hurts Democrats if she runs on this platform. But what I was going to say is, to me, she is actually presenting a roadmap that Democrats should be following if they want to win.
Yeah, I certainly wish that they would say the things that she says, but I'm not sure they'd really go over that well with a lot of the voters. But, she, like I say, she makes a lot of sense, and I wish she was president.
Well, let me make this brief rejoinder to what you said, is that it might not go over so well. I would say it wouldn't go over so well with the people who give the most money to the Democratic Party, right? To the corporate elites and the, just the wealthy. Even people who are, say, upper middle class. And this is even when you look at Bernie or you look at AOC, it's true they get small dollar donations compared to the tens of thousands or thousands of dollars that other candidates often get. But even there, people who give even small dollar donations are more affluent than the average voter. So it does seem that our politics are controlled by those who are not suffering economically in the least, and are actually benefits of an unfair system.
And you're right. She didn't talk about identity politics, which was smart, because that really doesn't work too well. It hasn't worked that well for the Democrats, I don't think. And Democrats are losing people from the, African Americans and Latinos and young people even. And, that's something that they'll have to find a better way to, get more popular with those groups. I think one of the worst problems for Biden will be the border, immigration. It does seem like it's out of control, and he is the one that's going to be blamed for it.
I'm with you there, Arlen. I agree. Immigration is a tough issue. I think it is perceived as an economic issue. It is, to a very large degree, an economic issue. And I think it's so unfortunate. I think this has been an area where the Democrats, they're caught really in a hard spot, to be fair. It is tough to change the immigration law. It's such a lightning rod. I think the way you address the immigration issue is what Jill Stein is saying, is you provide a really tight safety net for every American. You guarantee everyone enough, and you also present a system that's fairer. So there isn't the perception that the billionaire class and the elites are getting everything their way. And I think because that's not where we are, people are looking for any scapegoat, lashing out at any possible victim, and immigrants certainly are an easy target.
I would say those people you're talking about, the ones with all the money, I think they're the real problems because the wealth inequality in this country is causing, I think, a lot of these problems where a lot of Americans are not getting those kind of things that they need, like healthcare, food, housing, because all the money seems to be going up. And you have 3 people in the United States that have more money than the bottom half of the country, Gates and Elon Musk and Bezos, and that's just obscene.
That's interesting. I did not realize that they were so. I'm not surprised to hear that, but I hadn't heard that. So you're saying Bezos, Gates, and Musk are the 3 richest men in America or people in America, yes. And they have more than half of us do?
The bottom half, right.
That's
Bernie Sanders has spoken about that, and I've checked it, and it's true.
Well, this is where I think Biden's failed. He has not talked about economic inequality. Even if he can't, I mean, there's 2 issues. The talk is cheap, but he doesn't even talk about this. He doesn't even talk about that I hear. Do you hear Biden talking about this issue? Maybe he does a little bit, but certainly not the way Bernie does. Or even go ahead.
He nibbles around the edges. He's a little more pro-union now than he ever was, or the Democrats ever were. But he doesn't really get into the heart of it. Any big programs, and of course they're not going to get any help from the Republican Party. He's not going to get any. So, his hands are tied in many ways.
You're watching Halitics. Arlen's with me. You heard the video. You saw the video of Jill Stein. Here's a response. Do you recognize that's David Pakman? Arlen, he's a well-known live streamer, podcaster. And so I thought I'd play his response and get your response to his response.
Okay.
Jill Stein is yet again running for president under the Green Party umbrella. You might remember that Cornel West first announced he was running under the People's Party, and people came to him and said, "Sir, there's no ballot access. You can't possibly win." And so then he went to Green Party, and now he's going independent. So there are going to be many choices in November of 2024. There is going to be the Democratic nominee, likely to be Joe Biden. Unless he dies, it's going to be Joe Biden, is my belief. There is going to be a Republican nominee. More than likely, it'll be the failed former president, Donald Trump. The most important thing in the 2024 election is ensuring that Donald Trump, or whoever is the Republican nominee, because they're all crazy other than Chris Christie, does not become president, and so that we prevent them from wreaking havoc on this planet for 4 years.
All right, so there's a viewpoint which, Arlen, I was going to guesstimate you pretty much agree with, but do you have anything to add to what Pakman said? I'm going to throw a few things at you and get your response, but anything you want to throw in there besides what he said, in addition?
Well, no, he's right. I think the biggest issue for this upcoming election will be, can we keep our democracy? Because like he says, if Donald Trump or another Republican like him gets in office, I think democracy is going to be a very difficult thing to hold on to. And it's all around the world. There's a lot of authoritarian countries that are, like the way it is, and Trump admires all of those. So, and I think it's not wrong to say fascism is close.
It seems like there's certainly an argument that Pakman provides that I don't wholly disagree with. Couple of things I want to kind of get drilled down into, though. One, he says Chris Christie is the only one who's sane. I would have to throw, and I'm not a fan of either. I think Chris Christie is extraordinarily corrupt. If you look at what he did with that George Washington Bridge scandal, where it basically closed the bridge because he was angry at the mayor of Fort Lee for refusing to endorse him. That's absolutely criminal. He should have been prosecuted for that. But I don't know that makes him crazy. I don't think Nikki Haley would meet my definition of crazy either. DeSantis is a really, really bad guy. So leave him in that pile. But I don't know that I can distinguish between Haley and Christie the way Pacman apparently does. Although maybe he wasn't even thinking of Nikki Haley. I don't know.
Just an aside, I don't know if you heard, but Tim Scott has dropped out of the Republican race.
I had read that. He was kind of an afterthought. He was getting zero support.
Right.
He's not a real, to be fair, I don't think he's really charismatic. I mean, I've seen him speak. He's kind of dry. He's not really exciting. Maybe some will say it's because there's racist Republicans and he's black. But Herman Cain seems to have gotten a bit of traction 4 years ago. I think part of it is Scott just isn't really appealing, on his own. So I think, I wouldn't give Christie any kind of any sort of credit the way Pacman did versus the others. I don't like him anymore, so I'll make that point. Here's what I really have a problem with what Pacman said. I don't necessarily disagree with his conclusion. Well, I do disagree with it. I don't think we should let the real fear of Donald Trump blind us to the reality of life under the Democratic Party, which has been very, very rough for so many Americans. That's where I'm going with this. I watch, that's his 60-second clip. I watched Morning Joe go on and on about how important it is not to let a Jill Stein or a Cornel West or whomever, Joe Manchin, siphon votes away from Biden. My problem with that argument is those folks never acknowledge why so many Americans are so disaffected, so disenchanted, so angry at the Democratic Party. They just refuse to do that. And that, to me, causes them to lose a lot of credibility.
Well, there's a lot of problems that we have in this country, and seeing as Biden's the president, he's going to get a lot of the blame. But, like I said before, he gets no help from the Republican Party. They have nothing to offer, but they keep going on. And by the way, Christie, I think another problem for Christie is his weight. He doesn't look like the kind of president the Americans would vote for. And that
so many of us are heavy, though, Arlen. I think that may have changed. It's like you never saw overweight people on TV. And then with Roseanne, that started to change. And now more and more, a lot of ads, you see heavier people, plus size people. So I think America may be ready for a heavy, a corpulent president. Trying to come up with nice words to say it.
Possible, but I don't think it's going to be Christie anyway. The one who's most qualified and the one who seems most reasonable is Nikki Haley. She would be a strong candidate, I think, although the fact that she's a female may not help her.
She's so corporatist. She's completely in the bag for Israel. I think those will be big problems for her. I don't just say that because I don't like her. And for those reasons are among the reasons I don't like her. I think the Republican base is all in for Trump because he does provide a somewhat slightly populist message, which is completely absent from every other Republican.
Who we really have to depend on in this situation is Jack Smith and Fani Willis. If they could get him, charged guilty, with those kind of things and even put in jail, that might change the view of people. I hope it would, but we really have to work a little harder on seeing that Trump could.
My response to that is, Arlen, it's the Democratic Party's responsibility, and it's the Democratic candidate's responsibility to provide reasons why people should vote for them. And I just don't think they do. Now, we'll look at the polls real quick. This is the latest. There's a whole bunch of them. This is the latest poll that I saw in Real Clear Politics yesterday. Maybe there's something came out this morning. If there is, I missed it. This is very consistent, Arlen, with what the New York Times reported early last week. It is very consistent with what CNN reported this week as well, last week as well. But if you look at those important states, Trump is leading in all of them. Georgia +7, well, except for Michigan. Georgia +7, PA, Pennsylvania +3, Michigan is a tie. Or if you throw West and Kennedy into the mix, Biden gets a 1-point bump. And we'll get into that too when you look at it with the additional candidates. Wisconsin, pretty much a dead heat. Trump slight edge there. Nevada, Trump with a lead, just as the time showed. Arizona, North Carolina. North Carolina is probably still a red state, so that's no surprise. Basically, I think if you look at this, you say Biden is not consistent with what we've seen. He is not running consistent with what we saw last week's election results, which were very good for the Democrats. And also, when you do throw the third and fourth party candidates in there, this doesn't include Jill Stein, by the way, and doesn't include Joe Manchin, it more than likely will, in the end, help Trump a little, although I do think Kennedy probably will take more votes from Trump. So it's understandable that the Democratic-leaning pundits like Morning Joe and Packman are afraid of a Jill Stein run. But what is, again, the problem is they don't talk about why a Jill Stein run is so appealing to so many Americans.
Well, if she is that appealing to so many Americans, I haven't seen any numbers of hers that are very high. So,
well, at least intriguing, if not appealing, intriguing. Why it doesn't scare Americans, and why at least some will make the choice to vote for a West, vote for a Stein, as opposed to knowing that it may well help reelect Trump.
I'll tell you, I'm noticing one thing. There's starting to be a few more Democrats who are kind of pushing Biden to, think about dropping out. Obviously the polls are not in his favor. Everybody knows he's too old for American voters to be comfortable with. So I think, David Axelrod and several others are starting to say, hey, it's time for somebody else to be in there. And, the polls are just too strongly against you, Joe Biden.
That's fascinating. I knew the Axelrod comment. I haven't heard others. We do have a caller. Let's see if we can get our caller on the line. Good morning in California. Caller, who is this?
Morning, fellas. It's John.
Hey, John. Great to talk to you. I didn't want to assume it's you because I think I had some other callers from CA last week, or at least one, and it wasn't you. So I didn't want to make that assumption, and it doesn't pop up. Just if folks are at all curious about the workings of this program, all I see is Salinas CA, so that doesn't narrow it down. John, what's on your mind, my friend?
Hi, John.
Hey, good morning, Arlen.
Yeah.
About the polls, there's a great article in Washington Post. Trying to actually look at it.
Jennifer
right now,
Rubin, right? You're talking about Jennifer Rubin's commentary. I was thinking of you when I read that, where she basically mocks the whole idea of those polls being meaningful at all. Is that what you're talking about, if I may ask?
Yeah, well, it's important that she was talking about the aggregate. What's being reported, is it a single poll? If it's a single poll, then there are single polls out there that show that Biden is actually leading in those states. Now, if you want to talk about the aggregate, you have to take into account there are a lot of outfits out there that lean right. And, basically her argument was it's too early. And, in 2011 and 2012, everyone was afraid Obama was going to lose to Romney, and because of what the polls were saying, and that didn't happen. So something's wrong with the polls. You also have to take a look at Democrats are overperforming in every single election since the Dobbs decision. And even the governor of Mississippi just barely squeaked by. And she likened that to being if, Gavin Newsom won in California by like 51%, with 51% or something.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up. I referred to that race too as a positive sign, even though it was ultimately won by the Republican. I agree, John. I think that was a positive sign for the Democrats, that Mississippi race we're talking about now.
Oh,
Yeah,
definitely.
Democrats.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I'm just saying that, Democrats had a good candidate. The Republican candidate was a real bad one. He'd been in trouble before. And the Democratic candidate was some kind of a cousin of Elvis Presley. So, I was hoping he would win, but he didn't. They're just too red in Mississippi.
Yeah, there was a scandal involving the Republican. It had to do with monies that I guess the football player, the quarterback there, had raised or was using, siphoning off for himself, that were supposed to be used for poor kids in the Mississippi school system. That's Brett Favre. And the Democrat really tried to tie it to the Republican, who, as you said, was very unpopular anyway. But still, I agree with John, too. I think that race does suggest the Democratic strength, even in a dark red state. So, yeah, I think those are all fair points. But I think it's also fair, John, to say Biden's not a great candidate.
No, he's not. He's not. The Democrats could definitely, they could run better than Biden. But what I don't think they're going to get is a candidate that's more progressive than Biden that can win. And I don't necessarily think that Biden is all that progressive, but I take those words literally. I don't think they can get a candidate that's more progressive that can win. That can beat the Republican. Maybe Gavin Newsom, but you can make arguments that Gavin Newsom is not more progressive than Biden. Again, he ran on single payer, and then as soon as he's elected, you don't hear a single thing about that anymore. He talked a lot about that in his campaign, and then that could work against him. If
I don't think Gavin Newsom is particularly progressive, and I think being from California probably would be a net negative for him. So I think those are good points, Arlen. Not Arlen, John. I don't think he's the best point, but the one thing you could say for Gavin Newsom is he seems a little more vibrant, right? I mean, he's a little more, even when you watch Trump, and I'm going to try to get a Trump clip for you, he's got more, he seems more, I don't know, he has more going on. He's louder, he's stronger in his voice. Biden really, I'm sorry to say, he just seems old. I don't know what else to say.
And Gavin Newsom is not afraid to go on Fox News as well, and so people know who he is. Even negative publicity is good publicity. Sometimes, if he's on Fox and debating with Hannity, and I think he kind of used Hannity to mop the floor every time he was on Hannity's show, but I just think that he would be a good contender, but at the same time, you would have this problem where there would be a huge number of disaffected women that would say, "What's wrong with Kamala? Wasn't she kind of anointed for the?" If Biden were to step down, isn't it her spot to step into? So you could create a huge problem there.
Well, I think this whole idea, I agree with you. There would be somewhat of an outroar. I think the outroar would be among the chattering classes, not among voters, among whom Kamala is extremely unpopular. But it's a problem to have an anointed anybody. And I don't think that should ever be the case. But you're right. You're right, John. You'd certainly read columns in the LA Times and the New York Times and the Washington Post about how the black woman was being disrespected.
Yeah,
I got a question for you.
No, she's not a popular candidate. And I think that's part of the problem, maybe, that Biden doesn't want to drop out because he knows Kamala would be next, and she's not a strong candidate. But one more thing about Newsom, and then I'll go back to you, John, and that is he's been traveling around the country all over like a presidential candidate. And so, I think it's not far from his mind. I think he'd prefer 2028, but if necessary, I think he would jump in this year if no one else did.
I just want to say one thing about those polls too, John, is that I put the latest one up, which is Bloomberg, but I know what Ruben said. You can find a poll to suit your fancy, but this is pretty representative. That's why I went with it. I mean, I could have put a whole bunch, but it gets overwhelming. But this is, and I was a little surprised. I thought we'd see a bump for Biden over that New York Times poll, which got a lot of attention, but he didn't, because follow-ups by, again, CNN, I think the Washington Post, and here Bloomberg showed the same basic numbers, which is Trump ahead in the important swing states.
Well, I haven't done my homework. Oh, sorry.
No, it's hard to know who's next, but no, I just want to say one thing about Kamala Harris. I mean, I think she's been treated poorly, and I'd like to see her, have a chance at least to be in the field of people that would be thought of as a, alternate to Joe Biden.
John, final word from you on Kamala, and then Arlen and I are going to move on. Okay.
I think if anything were to happen, it should happen in the primary process. But the one thing there's a question I wanted to ask you is, I still got to do my homework on this, but in Ohio, Republicans are already scheming to somehow get around the results of the constitutional amendment to women's right to abortion, and I think they're really. I don't see how that's a good political strategy for them. The voters said we want to keep this, and now they're just like openly trying to get around it. It's like they must feel very comfortably gerrymandered into those districts if they're willing to do that.
Yeah, interesting. Arlen, response. I have a thought as well. John, thanks for calling in. Go ahead, Arlen. Anything on the abortion issue?
Well, that sounds like a very Republican thing to do, find a way to, use the law somehow and use their advantage in numbers to change elections. And I think that really hurts them overall. I think it's, a bad rap on Republicans. But John also brought up a point I think is important, and that is in the last couple of years, Democrats have won, almost all elections, especially since Roe versus Wade was thrown out. And I think, what's more important, elections or polls? And,
no, absolutely. But I will say this, what the Republicans seem to do on occasion, which the Democrats almost never do, Arlen, is they fight for what appear to be their principles. Now, I think the principle that a woman shouldn't be able, or a girl shouldn't be able to decide whether she's going to have a baby or not is a terrible, terrible principle. And I totally disagree with it. But they're signaling to their base and even to other voters, we're going to fight for what we believe in. And the Democrats, I don't think they ever signal that, or very, very rarely. And they also don't signal the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. What they do signal is we're going to bend our knee to Speaker Pelosi. We're going to bend our knee to Minority Leader Jeffries. We're going to bend our knee to President Biden. We're not going to fight for the people who put us in office. And that is one thing that Republicans seem to be willing to do.
But they've got a big problem in that they have a real extreme base, the Freedom Caucus, that is so strong and, will not give up on anything. And then you got Republicans who realize that could be a problem in an election if you ignore the results of.
I know, but people want representatives who will fight for them and fight for what they believe is right. And it does seem.
If they don't believe. Yeah, if they don't,
and who have beliefs at all, who have some core, some belief system.
it's obvious that most of the country wants to see women have rights to just, over their own bodies. And I think it'd be a big mistake if Republicans, stuck with their old message. And I
agree, but I think we're talking around each other and you're ignoring my point. I do agree this is a political loser overall for Republicans, but I also believe that they do signal a certain willingness to stand firm, at least on some principles. It doesn't appear to me that the Democrats stand firm on any principle. They just go with whatever their donors or their political bosses tell them to do. And that's extraordinarily off-putting, and I think explains a lot about why we are where we are. All right, so there's a lot of consternation. I'm going to move on now because we have a lot more to get to. There's a lot of consternation, obviously, that this guy could be our next president. So here's why I think that consternation is well-founded.
Countries are very smart. I got to know many of the presidents, the prime ministers, the dictators, the non-dictators, the people that get elected legally and the people that get elected illegally. I got to know every one of them.
And you can see he doesn't give a crap about how people get into power. He just wants that power for himself. That's not the main reason for this video. I'm going to play the video, more of it, because there's something he says I think is very scary. But the point is he is, somebody who doesn't believe in democracy. He doesn't believe in freedom. I agree with that. That is not who we want in power. No question about it.
I tell you, they're very smart people. And when they're sending people into our country, they're not sending their best. They're keeping their best. They want to keep their best. That's pretty basic.
So I always thought this was the worst thing Trump did, was his treatment of immigrants. And he is, again, immigrant bashing here. Of course, he shows remarkable ignorance or whatever. It just suits ignorance, I think is the right word, because he couldn't care less about what the truth is, saying, oh, they're sending their people here. No, countries in the global south aren't sending their people here. Their people are impoverished. Their people are desperate to escape gang violence, terrible crime, climate. There's climate migration. And, Trump is ignorant of all that and or couldn't care less. Arlen, any thoughts? I saw you sort of nod.
He makes a lot of gaffes. The Republicans try to make fun of Biden when he makes a gaffe, but Trump has been making quite a few lately. I think there's a little bit of maybe dementia seeping in and pressure from all those court cases. And he's saying, stupid things all the time. Like he thought he was running against Obama. He's getting some of the locations wrong. And there's a lot of ignorance there. Let's put it that way.
Or just like you said, dementia creeping in as well. All right, more from this clip.
But we're getting some very rough people coming into our country, and it's got to stop, and we've got to have the largest mass deportation effort in history. We're going to.
All right, so I think that's a very scary thing to say we're going to have the largest mass deportation effort in history. It's interesting because Republicans often claim to be the party of small government. They don't want overreach. They government takes away your freedoms. Remember that, what's his name? Reagan got elected with the argument that the biggest lie or the scariest thing you'll ever hear is I'm from the government and I'm here to help. So they're so anti-government, except, Arlen, when the government is there to kick around and abuse and mistreat people who are poorer and weaker than they are.
Yeah, we saw what happened to the deficit and the debt. It just went up when Trump was in power. And so that proves that the Republicans, it's not their biggest thing that they want. It's just something that they can campaign on. But like you say, when they're in power, they do things a little bit differently than they would like the Democrats to do. So,
well, they use government to serve their ends, not as they don't cut it back. They blow it up in worse ways than the Democrats do, for sure. And we do need a government. We need a government for a lot of reasons, but I think the biggest reason, if you want to boil it down, is to protect the weak from the strong.
Seems like the Republican view is we want the government to enforce laws that benefit the strong against the weak. So, we go in different ways. All that said, and again, I certainly am no fan of Trump's, I think the media gets so much wrong, and I want to just show this here, Arlen, more. I think the media overreaches and actually helps Trump. This is from the New York Times coverage of Trump and his immigration plans. And to me, it's overreach. So he says we need the largest mass deportation in history, right? And the New York Times leverages that into sweeping raids, giant camps, and mass deportations. I'm not saying that that's false, but isn't that a little bit exaggerated based on just what we heard Trump say? Is that really, can you fairly glean there'll be sweeping raids and giant camps just based on what he said? Is that a fair synopsis in your view?
I think people want to think that he's going to do all those things. And I think that's what he's trying to get people to think. There's going to be obviously a lot of legal issues on these things, but I don't think he would reject any of those things, giant camps, sweeping raids.
He might not, but if you're saying that's an appeal that will appeal to his base, then why, if the New York Times can't stand him, which they clearly can't, and the writers of this article specifically, then why would they present what I guess you're saying is sort of a campaign ad for him?
Well, they're trying to be truthful. They're trying, this is the kind of thing that a lot of people worry about, the mass, immigration and all that. And so Trump is pushing against that. He's telling people that, our country's changing and, maybe we want it more like it used to be. So we'll have to get rid of some of the people that have come in. It's an issue that a lot of people it'll resonate with a lot of people.
Well, I think that the New York Times published this article because they want to scare the living bejeebers out of Democrats. And they want Democrats to give more money, Democratic voters to give their, elite readership to give more money to Democrats. They want the people who, the corporatists who rely on relatively cheap immigrant labor to fear that they're going to lose that source of that input at the low price that they're getting. I think they want a lot of, upper middle class to affluent house husbands and housewives to fear they're going to lose their domestic help. Their housekeepers will be deported, and they want everyone to rally, all the elites to rally against Trump. That's how I read that. But I agree that I think that a mass deportation is wrong and anti-democratic and cruel and inhuman. I think Trump should have been impeached for putting the immigrants in camps and separating them at the border. I think that denied them due process and violated various laws. So I would have liked to have seen him impeached for that. Of course, the Democrats never did because they're doing almost the same thing. But my argument is simply that is an overstatement. The New York Times is exaggerating what Trump has actually said. I'm not saying he wouldn't do this, but they're saying he will do this. And I don't think that's a fair reading or a fair inference from what he said. That's my point. I think that in the end hurts them because they say things, the corporate media, the liberal media says things that ultimately aren't true. They assume, yes, he did conspire with the Russians. Well, he didn't, or at least there's no evidence that he did. So they lose a lot of credibility. They you can go back to Judith Miller. I know that's 20 plus years ago, but they say that Iraq, what was it, that Iraq is got weapons of mass destruction. They don't. And go through story after story that they presented that supports the elite narrative. And I think they lose credibility. The reality of Trump is bad enough. You don't need to make him even worse.
Yeah, the reality of Trump is bad enough. And if they want to discourage people from voting for him, they just have to, report everything that he says every day, because so much of it is just, way out in another world. Just yesterday or this weekend, he called Nancy Pelosi a crazed lunatic, and he joked about her husband getting, battered with a hammer from one of his people. He's just, he says the most outrageous things and gets away with it. And that's what, a lot of us wonder how he can do that.
Well, the thing about Pelosi being crazed is a very strange thing to say, because I would think most of Pelosi's critics, including me, would never say she was crazed. She's remarkably sane. I mean, to have stayed, alive, to have maintained her relevance as long as she has, and to be, elected speaker repeatedly, you're not getting that unless you're a smart, sane, maybe a cutthroat. I'll give you that, but not insane. So, Trump clearly is gets a lot wrong. He's a narcissist. He's amoral. He's a terrible person. He shouldn't be president. I'm just saying you don't need to. I think the reason that the media does this, a couple of things, is one, if it bleeds, it leads. The more extreme you come across, and we live in a media landscape now where there's so much competition for eyeballs. As you mentioned, the competition to be extreme is very, very strong. So there's part of that. I think also that the truth about Trump, while it's bad, there's plenty of things, like I said, that the Democrats are doing that's awful too. And if they didn't paint Trump in as dark colors as they do, then they'd have to kind of acknowledge, well, yeah, when it comes to immigration, Democrats are bad too. Democrats have camps too. Democrats have rounded people up too. And they don't, that doesn't suit their interests, Arlen.
Well, the fact that he called Pelosi a crazy lunatic is not going to be big news, because he says that kind of thing about everybody. Look what he says about the judges and all the prosecutors that are trying to indict him, and just everybody in the world that he thinks is not on his side. He'll exaggerate about what awful people they are, and that's just also.
I honestly don't think anyone, to be fair, cares very much about Nancy Pelosi's feelings. I mean, she's not popular. She's certainly sane, but she's hardly a popular politician. And I don't think anyone's going to shed any tears about someone, an insult to Mama Bear. All right, let's get, so there you go. Maggie Haberman and Red round up undocumented people and detain them in sprawling camps. So obviously the language is very tendentious. It's designed to scare you, as I said. It's a crackdown, an extreme expansion. A lot of words that, my senior writing teacher wouldn't have liked very much if I used them. But the Times is they want to scare people, and the reality of Trump is scary. It's true. There's no question about it. Maybe not quite, does not necessarily justify those particular words, in my opinion. I think in the end, the media loses credibility. And why did they do that? Well, one of the three writers, of course, catches my eye is Maggie Haberman. And I question, Arlen, whether she should be put on stories like this. She's clearly so associated now with the anti-Trump movement that I think it's fair to question her her what's the word I'm looking for? Her disinterestedness, right? It's fair to question her bias. So, and I remember people often criticizing when I would bring up pieces that Maureen Dowd had written that were critical of Hillary. People would question her independence, because Maureen Dowd had long been very critical of Hillary Clinton. I always felt like Maureen Dowd was fair, but I don't like Hillary, so maybe I wasn't being fair either. Here's the thing, though. I don't think Maureen Dowd ever wrote a book called Con Woman. Maggie Haberman, The Confidence Man, The Making of Donald Trump and the Breaking of America. She has every right to write that book. I'm not saying she shouldn't write it. She was part of a team that won a Pulitzer Prize for reporting on Trump's advisors and their connections to Russia. My question to you, Arlen, is this. Should the New York Times be using Maggie Haberman now to be a part of a team that presumably is supposed to write objective pieces about Trump?
Well, the one nice thing about the New York Times and Washington Post, they have multiple writers, so there's always somebody that could contradict her, or editors that might soften what she said, or if they don't like what she said, eliminate it. So I'm not too worried about that. I think overall they're going to get the big picture where they have several writers who really know what they're doing and have a lot of experience.
And then that's fair. I do. I would just note, though, that I think a lot of people are going to lose that nuance. And they just see that name. They know she's on CNN all the time, making fun of Trump. And I think it hurts the paper's credibility to use her in that role.
Yeah,
but I understand your point. I don't think it's completely, it's not unfair. Okay, yeah. More on the what I would call over the top coverage of Trump. You I think gave me this article, maybe not. So plot revenge. They are going to deploy the military to quell potential unrest. This is dangerous and unconstitutional. Again, I read this article, Arlen. Maybe I missed something. I felt like, again, Trump is really, really bad. But the language, again, paints him in such shades of evil that I think people are going to say, no, this is too much. It's over the top again. Your thoughts?
Well, I think it's very, to be expected from Trump. I mean, this is the kind of thing that he talks about and the kind of people that he wants, with him in power. And, that's another issue. And when he first became elected president, he had people who kind of control him a little bit. But if he were to become president now, he'd have people that are on his team and total allies and let him get away with a lot of awful things that he wouldn't have gotten away with in his first term.
So you're good with that coverage. You have no problem with that.
Yeah. I think that sounds like Trump.
Yeah, I made my point. And I'll just a few more quotes from this. I wanted to get it in because I think it is important, right? I mean, especially if it's true, it's really important. Trump and his allies have begun mapping out plans to use the government to punish critics and opponents should he win a second term, with the former president naming individuals he wants to investigate or prosecute. This is the problem I have with that more than any other. I read the article. I'm not going to give every quote. Maybe you have something because I think you read it too, Arlen. I didn't see the specific evidence for this claim that I felt was strong enough to warrant making it. I think these newspapers, the top papers, the papers of record, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they would be careful in the past to level that kind of a charge without having direct quotes to support them with a named source. And I'm not seeing that. And for me, that's problematic.
Yeah, that could be a problem. But again, they wouldn't go in print with this kind of a story unless there was something behind it, unless there were people who were telling him this is what he's planning on doing.
Well, you read the article, right, Arlen? Am I missing something? Was there more to it? I want to be very fair. I was scanning this and I do subscribe to the Post. But I really looked through it and I was trying to find something that I thought would justify this. Did I miss it? I hope maybe you're looking through it right now. You've got a little more time. I see you pull your paper out. If you have a quote in there, read it. And let me go to the next slide here that I've got, because I think it may It may identify. Well, this is just, again, an assumption by a pundit here from the University of Virginia, which is, of course, a very fine, highly reputed, prestigious university. And so what Sakrishna Prakash says, it would resemble a banana republic if people came into office and started going after their opponents willy-nilly. Well, we don't want that, Arlen, and I know you keep looking, but isn't this what happened when Trump came into office the first time? Didn't the FBI and didn't Congress completely go after him willy-nilly for anything they could come up with?
Well, they had reason to. There was plenty of evidence. That's for sure.
Did they? I mean, did they really have reason? Weren't we? We've got Trump's tax reports. Isn't that what? I've got his tax reports, his tax returns.
Well,
and it was like a complete nothing burger. It was going after him willy-nilly, Arlen.
Well, like I say, they did impeach him twice. Got to give the Democrats credit for that. They couldn't, take it all the way because you got another party that's pro-Trump. And, you might be right about what you're saying about there's not a lot of things to back up the story about the terrible things he would do in his second term. But they did quote two words. It says, in public, Trump has vowed to appoint a special prosecutor to, quote, go after, unquote, President Biden and his family.
He did say that. I wasn't crazy about that, but I don't think he even gets to do that. It's up to the Attorney General to make the decision to appoint a special prosecutor, and I'm not sure. He did say it. That's bad. I'm glad you brought that quote up. I was thinking of putting it on the slide. It didn't jump out at me as justifying the language that we saw earlier.
And it's not just Donald Trump we should be worried about, but the people behind him. The Heritage Foundation, the Miller, and all those people. Who,
they're bad people. They are. I don't. Yes, they're bad people. But again, the truth is bad enough. I don't think the paper needs to exaggerate, what I would call use hyperbolic language or exaggerate. We have another story, Arlen. It is just past 1, but you know what? I'm always delighted to talk to you, and I actually have 2 more stories, but I'm going to save the one that's the environmental one for either tomorrow or Wednesday. Just want to give a quick what's the word I'm looking for? Promotion for tomorrow's program. I'm going to have on Mac, and I always, it's not McDonald. It's Mac something, but it's not McDonald. Lawrence, yes, Mac McDonald. Lawrence Mac McDonald. He's an author. He's a friend of mine. He's a great environmentalist. He wrote, How Can Baby Boomers, I'm a baby boomer, can I save the planet? Or can baby boomers save, something like that. We'll talk about that tomorrow. It's about the environmental crisis. He's a great activist with Climate Defiance, Lawrence McDonald. So we'll have him on. And then I'm going to be talking to Jamar Lloyd on Wednesday from Food and Water Watch. So I'll save the environmental story, which involves Greta Thunberg, until either tomorrow or Wednesday. But Arlen, real quick, you were saying how bad the Republicans are. I agree. Quick, you want to talk about this story? New House Speaker tries to muster Republicans to avert government shutdown. 4 hours. That means it was early this morning. I took that clip from it, so they don't even have a date line because the date line is today, November 13, Monday. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, it is a real big problem in the House of Representatives. I mean, the Republicans have one branch of government and they don't know how to use it properly, obviously. And, they get somebody like Michael Johnson. If you look at his whole record and his life, there's so many things that are red flags. He's a fanatic about a lot of things, but he's trying to get this bill passed that would keep the government, in business. But, I don't know if he's going to be able to do it. Kevin McCarthy tried and he couldn't do it. So I don't know what's going to happen to him, but the Republicans look like they're unorganized and don't know what to do.
Well, Arlen, you did mention, and he certainly does seem very extreme in terms of his record, evangelical, hard right. But you also mentioned he is trying to keep things going, and it looks like he's maybe able to thread that needle. So Do you give him some kind of credit for that? Let me see if I can get this deck up here. I know you don't like to give Republicans any credit, but here it is. He faces his first big legislative battle as he tries to marshal his fractious Republican majority in supporting an unconventional plan. Interestingly, Arlen, and we'll get into this a little bit more, there are Democrats who are behind this plan. So is maybe he wasn't such a bad choice? I mean, at least when it comes to averting the shutdown, which I frankly don't. We have to avert it because there are too many poor, struggling, working people who depend on government. But I think a lot of people just feel like the government really is the problem now, and they don't care if there's a shutdown. So for him to be able to keep it going would be an accomplishment, would it not?
Well, if he can, but it seems to me I read that he was trying to get something passed that would not involve any cuts to the federal government. And, McCarthy tried to do the same thing, and it didn't work for him. They got rid of him. So I don't know how, this speaker is going to get away with it.
But if that's true, what you said, if he's trying to do this without cuts, that's what you want, right? I mean, you would prefer that they do come up with a plan without cuts.
I think he knows it's the only way that it's going to get through the Senate and through, to Joe Biden, and that's the only way that's going to happen. So
you're going to make this really hard on me, but I'm going to figure out a way to get you to give him some grudging, if not positive, not negative statement. I mean, aren't you at least somewhat heartened by him making this effort to overcome the partisan gridlock, which, as you acknowledge, Arlen, is exacerbated gravely by his right flank, which he's always been part of.
Yeah, well, I mean, he knows this is why he's the speaker, to try to get this kind of thing passed where they could keep the government going. But how to do it is, of course, the big problem. And can he appease enough people on the right? Like McCarthy couldn't, we just don't know that. So
don't the Democrats deserve a lot of I mean, I look at a $31 trillion and I'm not like a math major, but that seems like a lot of money. We have a $31 trillion plus debt. Our credit rating is now negative from stable. Shouldn't the Democrats have done something to try to bring the debt and our budget deficit, which is now close to $2 trillion annually? Shouldn't the Democrats have really tried to cut that? It seems like from all I heard, they were just talking about more spending that would, maybe some tax hikes on the periphery, but why haven't they focused on more fiscal responsibility as well?
Well, because, you were complaining before that there's, people in this country can't get their health care, they can't get their food, they can't get their housing. And so where are you going to cut? That's the problem. And you've got
I would cut. I would cut the military, and I would cut the military, and I would raise taxes drastically on the rich.
Well, there you go. The second one, I certainly agree. And I agree with the first thing you said. I mean, the military needs to be cut. I think they're going to have a $1 trillion budget this coming year. And, that's crazy. So, but definitely there has to be higher taxes on those who are doing well.
And the Republicans seem to be slightly more willing, at least some of them, to put the Pentagon budget on the block as opposed to the Democrats, but they're both bad. I'm not giving a brief to vote Republican, but that's not an area where the Democrats have distinguished themselves either. Let's be honest.
It is good news that there are some Republicans that are questioning, spending so much money on the military. I mean, that's something that I would never have thought possible, but they are starting to, some of them are starting to say that.
I think Trump is part of the reason for that, because he definitely campaigned on keeping the military budget in line. And you never heard that from any Republicans. And it was clearly a winning issue for him. So here's Johnson's unusual two-step continuing resolution where he kind of splits the budget into two different parts. One is military construction, veterans benefits, transportation, housing, urban development, agriculture, FDA, energy, and water programs. Those would expire on the 19th. The other operations, including the Defense Department, would get another couple of weeks past. Doesn't seem to me like that's such a... I mean, I guess it's kind of creative in a way because it looks like he's doing something, but really it is kicking the can down the road, Arlen. But what the Republican base seems to like about this is that they don't have to just vote for every all or nothing. At least there's going to be at least some division of budget entry, budget items, so they can vote, say, for less for, say, housing and urban development, which they'll vote against, whereas they won't have to vote down the defense budget. So I guess that's what this is about, but I don't know if you have more insight than I do, because I'm not clear, to be perfectly fair. I'm not, be perfectly honest, I'm not clear what's going on.
Well, if he's got the date of February 2nd or whatever, I mean, that gives time, and that'll, like you say, kick the can down the road, which is about all anybody's able to do these days. Just kick the can down the road and see what'll happen in another month or two.
Well, it does look like this will be tweaked, but even the Republican hardliners and some Democrats seem grudgingly willing to go along with it. Now, if that happens, are the Democrats making a mistake? Because after all, if they give him a win at all, won't that be a win for the Republicans? Or do you think people aren't paying attention?
If he looks good and he keeps his job, I don't know who that benefits, because he's going to do some crazy things that a lot of Americans will not agree with. But at the same time, he'll satisfy the ultra-right Republicans. So, I don't know what's going to happen to him. We'll have to just wait and see.
All right, Arlen, final point on why this, I think, is really important stuff is you can see if they don't come to some kind of an agreement, up to 4 million federal workers will be laid off, which is very problematic, not just for them, but for people who depend on them. National parks will close, and all these other really important government services like financial oversight, which obviously is critical because, well, unless you trust the Wall Street wolves not to eat the sheep if people aren't looking, and scientific research. So I hope they come to some kind of agreement, but again, I'm always leery when Republicans and Democrats agree. That also often leads to bad outcomes, Arlen. All right, that's going to do it for me. But you get your final word in, as always, Arlen. I will be done, but click that like and click subscribe. I got to say it again. We got to get those numbers up. All right, Arlen, you get the final word, and then we're going to call it a day.
Well, it seems like the budget things always seem to get solved at the last second because nobody really wants the government to shut down. So, and that'll probably happen again. And they'll, like you say, keep kicking the can down the road. I don't know. I don't see an answer here yet, but time will tell.
All right, Arlen, thank you for everything. Always great to have you on. And I really appreciate the positive back and forth. Even when we disagree, it's still positive. Makes my life a lot easier as well, just to have you to as a sounding board, if nothing else, and you provide much more than that. That's going to do it. We'll be back. I'll be back tomorrow. Arlen will be with me, I believe, next week, Thanksgiving week. I'll be off Thursday, but I'm going to try to keep my program going on Friday. See you tomorrow.